And in author Tom Wolfe's phrase, it takes the right stuff to do it. Worth mentioning, I think, Bruce, and you and I have not had a chance to talk about this, but in the years of covering the American space program, one of the things that has always stood out is the dedication of the people at NASA. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration has been rightly and justifiably over the years, however you feel about the space program itself, a center of excellence and dedication to excellence. Nobody, it should be pointed out, can feel worse today about what has happened to this Space Shuttle Challenger than those many dedicated people, everyone from the secretaries up through the engineers, as to what has happened today. That one wants to keep in mind that there have been 56 manned U.S. space missions, 56, and never before today has anyone been even badly hurt, much less killed, during flight. There was the accident on the launch pad during the Apollo program in 1967, unless we forget those names. Virgil Gus Grissom, who was the commander of that flight, Edward White, Roger Chaffee, were killed January 27, 1967. 19 years ago yesterday, ironically, today, of course, being January 28th. On January 27th, 1967, 3 American astronauts lost their lives, but it was on the launch pad during the Apollo program. And Bruce Hall, you mentioned something before that caught my ear and may have with our viewers and listeners, that one theory about why the Soviets have lagged behind in manned space travel. One wants to point out that the Soviets have, in unmanned space travel, accomplished some marvelous and miraculous things, and they have done had some tremendous accomplishments in manned space flight. But in general, they've lagged behind in manned space flight, and the theory that one reason is they've never mastered having their spaceships ride the mixture of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, as the United States space program has depended on. That they're very good and have been very good ever since World War II in rocketry. They, like the United States, took advantage of some of the German knowledge during World War II of advanced rocketry, and the Soviets, when they moved across Europe, got their share, some would say more than their share, of Soviet scientists and engineers, their versions of Wernher von Braun and others, to help them develop the rocketry. While the Soviets have been good with rocketry, that they've never quite mastered this idea of liquid fuel. And one reason, of course, is that it is so tremendously dangerous. But that leads to the thought, we don't know much about how many accidents the Soviets have had, do we?
No, we don't know how many accidents the Soviets have had, but we have been given a lot of information indicating there have been a number of accidents, and the Soviets have had extreme difficulty, and several accidents, according to authoritative reports, when they were dealing with experiments with the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. It has been something that has been extremely difficult to master, and it has been a problem also in several other of the shots, not the shuttle shots, but in the earlier part of the program, the NASA program. That has also presented a problem, and it is something, as we have said, and you have repeated, Dan, it is extremely volatile. And once you're dealing with substances like that, that are so volatile, that you have to be extremely careful, and you have to have it just exactly right. The astronauts, many times before they would launch and after they would launch, they would call the whole launch procedure a 7 million pound of controlled explosion. And that's really what it is. Once they leave that launch pad, it is a controlled explosion that propels them into orbit.
Excuse me, Bruce, it must go right is right. I'm sorry to interrupt, Bruce. I know our audience understands this is live television and we don't have the best of communications between the two of us. Stay with me, if you will, Bruce, because there's a bulletin on the Associated Press just in from Washington. The Associated Press says, and I quote, President Reagan's State of the Union speech scheduled tonight has been canceled. House Republican leader Robert Michael's office is said to have just announced this. Yes, I understand this is contrary to information that we had from the White House and our White House correspondents just a short while ago. We have no independent confirmation of this. The last official word we had was that President Reagan would indeed, on the advice of Donald Regan, his White House Chief of Staff, go ahead with the State of the Union speech tonight. But the Associated Press now reports on a bulletin basis, speech canceled. President Reagan's State of the Union speech scheduled tonight has been canceled, according to the House Republican leader Robert Michael's office. We'll be in the process immediately of checking and double-checking that, and we'll keep you posted as we go along. Our last report was that the President intended to go ahead with the State of the Union address tonight as previously scheduled at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We see scenes from the White House briefing room on one of our monitors here, and it may be that Larry Speaks, the President's spokesman, will be out fairly shortly to give us the official word on whether the President's speech is or is not remaining on the schedule for tonight. At our last official word, it was on the schedule, but the AP says it has now been canceled. We had said some time ago that we were going to discuss the fact that Judith Resnick, the second woman in space, was aboard this space shuttle this morning. We're going to hold on for a moment and not do that, and if you see me looking off to the side, I want to explain to you why. I do have a monitor in which the White House briefing room is up, and our thought was that perhaps Larry Speakes would be appearing shortly to tell us whether the President's speech had been canceled or not. So if you see me looking off to one side, that's the reason that is being done. The NASA officials continue to be silent about what happened this morning and why it happened. There's not been any official announcement that all 7 persons aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger perished. It seems inconceivable after seeing the videotape that anyone could have survived, but NASA is in the uncomfortable position of not being able to definitely determine whether anyone survived the flight, and understandably, they have made no announcement as of yet. We were saying earlier about the dedication of the National Aeronautics Space Administration people, everyone from the janitor up to the secretaries, to the engineers, to the scientists, to the administrators, to the backers of the NASA program in Congress, how dedicated they've been to excellence and to safety. And the fact that they've got 56 manned U.S. space missions, this is the first time there's been any serious accident in flight. There was that 1967 fatality, 3 astronauts killed on the launch pad, but nothing in flight before this. And there have been 24 space shuttle missions, 56 manned space shots by the United States, 24 space shuttle missions, all of them in safety. A remarkable achievement, and all of them under close public scrutiny, all of them open to coverage all the way through. Only this morning, for the first time in flight, a disaster. NASA said that the explosion occurred about 1 minute and 12 seconds into the mission at a point where the astronauts were beginning to throttle their engines up to maximum thrust. Now, this was after the astronauts throttled their engines down to a 60% level at the 35-second mark. At the picture, you have this tremendous liftoff, and at the 35-second mark, they throttled back to a 60% level. That's in order to reduce the forces of gravity during the liftoff. For those of you who remember your high school or college physics, that in order to reduce the forces of gravity during liftoff itself, you have this tremendous thrust from below. They throttle back to about the 60% level in order to help themselves get off. But at just before the explosion, you heard the voice saying, "Roger, throttle up." They were just at the moment of maximum thrust is when NASA apparently believes that the explosion occurred. Now, among those who witnessed the explosion were schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe's class and the children in the school in Concord, New Hampshire. They were watching the liftoff. Mrs. McAuliffe's attorney husband, Steve, and her 2 children, 9-year-old Scott and 6-year-old Caroline, they were in a crowd at Cape Canaveral. The members of the school where Mrs. McAuliffe taught were watching in Concord, New Hampshire. Members of her family, including her 2 children, 9 and 6, and her husband, and her mother and father, were all watching at the Cape. Also, they were members of the class in Concord, New Hampshire, had Go Krista Bannon.